So thanks to Jonathan and GeoIgnite, GeoMatics for the opportunity to speak. OGC is a proud supporter of this event from the get-go, and we shall continue to do so. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes today just giving a little bit of a taste of the outcomes from the OGC Disaster Pilot 2021. Subtitle Eyes in the Sky to Feet on the Ground. This will not be a deep dive. But as I say, just a little bit of a taste. So for those of you on the line who do not know who OGC is, we're essentially the hub for thought leadership, innovation, and standards for all things related to location to help build the future with the community and technology for the good of society. And we work really, really hard as the global group to improve our ability to find, access, interoperate and reuse all kinds of data, information, derived products, whatever have you. And our approach, once again, I mentioned collective problem solving. It's all about collaboration and a very agile process, which combines a unique combo of consensus-based standards, running code, real innovation projects, and partnership building. So who are our members? We're at 550 plus members at this point. It's a lovely balance between commercial, government, and research and academia. As I say, we are global, truly. And just a quick overview of how the OGC community functions. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have our members, as I mentioned, 550 plus, who basically collaborates to advance and apply science and technology approaches and innovations through a collective problem-solving methodology to basically enable, drive, and improve our ability to integrate, amongst other things, with the outputs being things such as I mentioned earlier, running demonstrations of how what the art of the possible it is to solve something, best practices, and of course, truly free and open international standards for anybody in the world to download and use. So onto the disaster pilot. So thanks to our sponsors, which was Natural Resources Canada, USGS, FTDC, and NASA, along with their supporters, CNIDA, which is the Peruvian Space Agency, more on that in a little bit. And of course, Amazon Web Services. I put a link here for the full demo recording. This is runs about 3 hours. I figured you didn't want me to run that today. So you can either get it straight at YouTube, or if that's difficult for your situation, you can just download directly from the OGC portal in an MP4 format. All right, so the Disaster Pilot 21 was one of the most successful innovation pilots we've run from the perspective of the broad range of stakeholders. I won't read off the name of every single organization on the list, but it's important to realize that we had input from all over the world on this. We had input from North America, Asia, the Caribbean, Central America, South America. Huge interest in this. So with this, with this many participants and this many organizations involved, it was really critical to ensure that the context of kind of the network of networks, or the network of relations, was reflected in this pilot, which it was. This is kind of a fairly busy slide, but a great combination of the data providers, technology providers, stakeholders, along with other international initiatives and organizations such as GEO. In the context of this one, of course, AmeriGeo was important, but there was a direct link to all of the regional GEOs, as well as the European projects. And of course, on the left-hand side of the screen, just a quick list of keywords for innovation, DP21, climate pilot. You'll learn a little bit more about that later in the presentation. and our plans for Disaster Pilot 2022, along with all sorts of related standards, and of course the whole outreach and capacity building aspect was important. The other thing that we structured the project to include was a really good representation from certain types of personas. So communities and populations affected, in-field personnel, the sort of people who make the decisions for those in-field personnel, analysts, product providers, and of course, Earth observation data providers. And this was a whole complex web, but the important point to take from this slide is we tried to be as inclusive of all actors within the disaster cycle as possible. So the goal of the disaster pilot: develop standards-based services to support rapid decision-making through the full life cycle of disaster management for multiple hazards, via advancing capabilities and practices to rapidly integrate, process, and transform Earth observation and other data streams for risk reduction, of course. Hard focus on analysis-ready data and the associated decision-ready information services, which is what's really needed. So this is integrating space-based and local data on an on-demand basis to feed responders. So via open APIs, optimized cloud services, cloud native processing was a key underlining theme in this. And of course, both connected and disconnected apps, as well as optimizing the web search for disasters. So local geographies, current observations, conditions, predictions. And this was all, as the note points out, towards the lower left of the screen. Historically, it's been estimated that 80% of response time is spent procuring and processing, preparing data. When I think in reality, we can do a lot better than that. So just a quick overview of the classic disaster cycles and critical indicators. So on the far left side, we have the classic emergency management cycle or disaster management cycle of detection, awareness, recovery, mitigation, prep. And next to it, we have a slightly different view, which is the incident response cycle, which is more of the local level. So awareness, response, mitigation, recovery, notification, to focus on risk vulnerabilities, threat predictions, severity assessments, impact awareness, response, and all of the things that are connected to disasters. So scenarios, there were three main ones. So landslide, flooding hazards, and pandemic impacts in these two river basins in Peru, focused on February to March 2021 data and intervals. Flood hazards and also pandemic again, once again in the Red River Basin, with March, April 2020 being chosen as the interval, and a health angle to this as well, which is the integration of health and EO data and services for pandemic response, in this case in Louisiana, with a focus to fit on the fit between available health data and a draft health SDI data model that came out of some previous work. So as I say, this is a fairly large pilot, lots of participants, lots of stakeholders. So I've just pulled out some of the highlights. There were a lot, and I'll just talk about these briefly. So once again, the link is on the right-hand side of the screen for downloading the full 3-hour, approximately 3-hour video. So one was analysis-ready data and decision-ready indicators support for flood and landslide using recipes, and in this case, implemented on OGC members' FME platform. Very straightforward. It's a Red River flood impact indicator. In this case, we're looking at roads, the flood day number, flood depth, safety buffers, and so on. And then basically what was extracted and processed from this was just a straight up map of where the flood, what infrastructure was impacted by the flood on that particular day, down to some details on exactly what was affected. So in this case, it was this particularly secondary road was clearly affected. Health, once again, this was a focus on EO Cloud platform concept developments, as well as the health SDI. We did a lot of work on creation and sharing of health indices in Peru to help expand not only that, but also the health spatial data infrastructure models in the US by HSR, Paul Churchyard. We had an excellent set of presentations from Omar at SATSEN in Spain, using Sentinel-1 to support flooding and landslide monitoring. And remember, these are all in the context of the use cases I mentioned earlier. And this one was the impact of road network and routing and interesting things like that in the management of disasters based on the 3 scenarios. So aims for the pilot. One of the key goals here was to produce what we called Readiness Guides, and they were developed for Earth observation data providers, ARD product providers, decision-ready information and indicators analysts, other stakeholders on how to prepare and coordinate with others to leverage standards-based cloud computing platforms. You know, it sounds like a really simple and easy thing to do. It isn't. And also a guide for Earth observation data users, relief organizations, field personnel, other response stakeholders, and how to prepare and coordinate. Once again, based on the cloud. We've got some sample results in the right hand here. Red River flood occurrence. This was developed by the University of Wuhan in China, overlaid in the DEM. And we have some Red River flood contours for 2011. And this was related, believe it or not, to the health work, because it's all related. So some of the lessons learned. All right, so data sharing and cloud computing are still too difficult for practitioners in particular to make use of easily. That the whole FAIR principle applies to beyond data. It also applies to how do I find appropriate cloud resources? How do I find other resources? Practitioners are generally much too busy to spend time up front and advanced prototyping and piloting, but should be open to training, guides, protocols, recipes, how-tos. So one of the key outputs from this was for the next time around, we need to have a specific thread for the actual practitioners, first responders, that sort of thing. We also learned, and this is kind of obvious, but reinforced, was practice, practice, practice. There is still a strong need for various practice sessions and operations to happen in advance so that people can train up. And of course, the availability and quality of spatial data in a region has a large effect on the possibilities of disaster awareness. A few more outcomes. You know, it was determined that minimum skills for exploitation of EO data are actually really accessible if, once again, this is supported by education, capacity building activities, cookbooks, documents, how-tos. ARD to DRI, once again, the recipes and the guides turned out to be quite possible or powerful, as long as there was good and effective collaboration between the providers and the end users, along with complicated disasters and cascading impacts are best addressed by diverse tools and integrated data, as illustrated by the flood impacts on health, transportation. I would certainly, once again, encourage people to download that video so they can have a look at the details. It was a really interesting integration of health organizations interested in health, data providers, cloud providers, responders, you name it. It was really good. So what's next? Well, more hazards, deeper capabilities, closer to operations. So not only landslides, flooding, inundation, droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, oil spills, no shortage of topics here. Develop service architectures, recommendations, and draft standards for analysis-ready data in the context of disasters. Once again, disaster-oriented, structured, and linked data. And expand the integration of diverse remote sensing sources with in situ and human observations, along with the social, economic, and political environment framework to actually deliver a bigger and a more rounder picture of what needs to be done for decision-ready clients. Also, the integration of open architectures, standards, GeoPackage, environmental data retrieval API, sensors, etc., and technologies, open source, cloud native processing, machine learning, natural language processing, all that sort of stuff. And this really will allow us to show specifically how the new OGC API suite can integrate a variety of standards and data quickly and easily into a pretty heterogeneous environment. As mentioned earlier, operational exercises need to be included the next time around. And more importantly, for the longer term picture, link climate change to the disasters realm. And develop and test capabilities for what we're calling rapid response indicator provision. That could be as simple as, you cannot move your vehicle over this road because it is unavailable due to whatever. So what's next? Climate change. For those of you monitoring OGC, we have a climate change services initiative underway. This is intended to be a 3 or 4 year project. Won't go into details on this this slide, but it's a combination of models, EO data, statistical data, non-climate data, social science, all under the concept of fair climate services. Ultimately to generate indicators, fuse data, demonstrate and visualize, once again, what is the art of the possible, and generate products for mitigation of climate change, disasters, evidence-based policymaking, and all of that good stuff. Based on a core foundation of standardized APIs, fair, smart ways to reduce data processing, AI, or the other way to put it is getting better at rapid and integrated pre-processing, processing, information extraction, and so on. So from the raw data all the way up to decision-ready data. So there is a direct connection between what we're doing with climate and disasters. So on the left, we have the fair climate services. And as we know, the frequency, severity, and quantity of things like extreme weather are increasing dramatically. So back to the graphic I showed earlier, there we have the classic disaster response cycle next to the classic incident response cycle. And once again, we want to connect this so that the outputs from fair climate services do support, once again, risk and vulnerability assessment, hazard monitoring and threat prediction, severity assessment, impact awareness, reporting, disaster response mitigation activities. So these two pilots are inherently connected. little shorter than I would like to be, but busy week for me. Once again, we have the full demo recording of 3 hours based on YouTube, or once again, the video. If you have an interest in participating, sponsoring, learning more about the upcoming disasters 2022, as well as the climate change pilots, I'd be more than happy to hear from you. There's my email address. Happy to provide any more information. So, and with that, John, I'm a little under my time here, but over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Trevor. We've got time for Q&A now. I would encourage the audience to put your questions in the Q&A tool. I've got a question about engaging and participating in the activities of the OGC. Is it only for organizations, or how can individuals get involved?
Okay, so OGC is fundamentally based on organizational representation, but the work is done by the individuals from those representative members. We do have an individual member category. You know, we have 40 or 50 individual members, but really it's based on the organization. So, for example, you know, with Amazon's participation in the disaster pilot, they provided not only web services and web resources and cloud computing resources, but they provided representatives to work directly with the group to advance the work. So once again, by organization.
So if somebody are there any NGOs that are part of the OGC that somebody could then join here in Canada because they wanted to get involved, they wanted to participate, and they were looking for a vehicle to do that? Other than you mentioned the individual category, are there organizations that you're working with that they could engage with to make that connection?
Yep, we have somewhere running around 30 to 40 alliance partners, and they range from other standards organizations like ISO, W3C, all the way to specific organizations related to a single domain, such as a good example is the Professional Land Surveyors of Canada, which is an NGO. So yeah, there are other ways to do that. Glad to take you know, direct communications from folk who want to figure out a way to be involved if their organization can't for whatever reason. So,
is there any educational institutions involved?
We have 110 university members. University of Calgary comes to mind, but the universities are spread all over the world. So Carleton University is another one in Canada, but yep, solid university, an educational institute. They're approximately 18% of our membership at this point. So
fantastic. So what's coming up next for the OGC broadly for 2022? Maybe if you could touch on that, and anything going on in Canada that would be of interest to the community that they might be able to engage with.
Right. So you know, the Canada and Canadians have been heavily involved in both the climate change work and the disasters work and a bunch of other work. So for 2022, you know, we hope to kick off both the climate initiative, the next phase of the disasters initiative, and on top of that, we're working really hard with the community to start working on the technical side, which is a cloud native geo. And for those not familiar with cloud native geo, that's being able to use the cloud, essentially just understanding what geo is in the first place, rather than a strange type of data that sits off in the corner. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the overall simplification. We will continue to have our member meetings. As I say, our next one in June is scheduled to be someplace in Europe. Stay tuned for that. Non-members are welcome to attend our meetings as well. Great place to connect with people, great place to get an understanding of what the cutting and leading edge developments are going on, both on a technical and application level, and a great place to learn more about the standards. The other one I would be remiss in mentioning is we also have an ongoing marine spatial data infrastructure, federated marine spatial data infrastructure pilot. Also rolling out, and we're just working on what's the plan for 2023 and onwards. But the key thing there is also connected to climate change, of course, is getting better at connecting land and sea. Because that's a huge non-trivial problem when it comes to seamlessly trying to connect traditional topo maps to bathymetric charts to simplify things pretty heavily. So lots of ways to get involved, lots of interesting stuff to happening. We generally are at lots of different events around the world, so have a look at our website. Sign up to our newsletter. That's probably the best way to stay up to date. That's a quarterly thing. We won't spam your inbox weekly, but it's also a good way to learn what's going on.
Fantastic. I'd encourage you to post links in the chat and as well on Slack for the community. That would be great. Trevor, thank you for the continued OGC support of GeoIgnite, Canada's National Geospatial Conference. As you mentioned, the OGC has been with us since the beginning. It's really important to us that we continue to work with you. The work that the OGC does on standards is incredibly important. The huge uptake in all things geospatial would not be possible without those standards. So thanks on behalf of everyone for that work.
All right, thanks for the opportunity again, and I hope you have a fantastic final day. We're not quite done with our member meeting. We've got today and one more day to go tomorrow. So our meetings run Monday to Friday. So
fantastic. Well, thank you, Trevor.